Hi, and welcome to the channel. My name's Chris, and I'm here to talk about books, and specifically one book in particular today, a book by Jim Wilburn, and it's The Seventh Cadence. Seventh Cadence is a epic fantasy book, part of a series. Jim's promised us 5 books as core elements of this series, which I'm very excited about, because spoilers, I think it's quite brilliant. But I'm going to talk about what it's about, because I'm going to encourage you to read it. I'm going to talk about a lot of the key characters and the plot, etc. that's in there. I'm going to talk about a lot of the themes that are in there, because I think it's one of the strongest aspects of it. I'll talk about the strengths, I'll talk about the disappointments, and I'll talk about some of the things that I think are really interesting about it, and highlight exactly why I think this book's really good, rather than just saying, oh, it's got an interesting story, or it has, you know, something worth getting your teeth into, an interesting character, something like that. When that's all done, and I know this is a book that very few people have read, but I think when people do read it, they'd want to come back and or see some discussion of some of the spoilery aspects of this. For a book that has as few reviews as it has at the moment, I expect somewhere down the line when book 2 comes out, book 3, people will go looking for this, will read it, and will want a primer for what, you know, some more in-depth conversation is in there. So I'll throw some of my thoughts in at the end, the bits that I really liked out of it that are in a spoilery fashion. So what is The Seventh Cadence? Well, it's a multi-POV story about a set of people in different factions who need to come together to fight off a common enemy. So this common enemy is one of a number of factions within the world. It's a multi-POV but also multi-factioned world. And they're being summoned, whether they know it or not, to be part of this overriding story of defeating back the common enemy, who are known as the Dominion. Now, a couple of things to set up about the world, because I think the world building aspects of it are the bits that a lot of people gravitate towards too, in terms of, well, what's interesting about this world? Well, we'll start primarily with the idea of the prophet system. So each of these factions has, at a core part of its government, or core part of its decision-making experience, what are known as prophets. And prophets have the gift of foresight. They can see big events that are happening and advise governments and leaders on what's going to happen, so that they can make according decisions. And this raises an interesting question, because if all of the nations and all of the parties have a prophet, and they're all doing this foresight thing, then is there really a function of a prophet in that case? Because if everybody can see what's going to happen, then what's really at stake? Or is it a case that they're necessary to keep up with the Joneses? Or what happens if there's a rogue one in the batch? These are all questions that I had at the start, and some of them come true and some of them get answered and some of them do not. But this idea of the prophet system, I think, is interesting, because they can set machinations and longer term plans ahead and shorter term plans for things that envelop. Like I say, it's a multi-faction world, and Seventh Cadence concentrates on one faction at the start, because the book starts with a king. He's involved in the battle and the wife's giving birth. All of these things come into play, and we're really showing that he's a successful king at the start, but he has roles and responsibilities and ideas and principles about life that he wants to pass on, or that he thinks are important. So we see the Dominion want to take over the rest of the world, want to knock everybody else out, but as usual with these multi-faction kind of stories, only the people that are directly in the crosshairs really see themselves as being in panic. Everybody's not actually interested in combining together their forces and pushing back the enemy at the point of attack. They just think they'll not get to us. And it's kind of an allegory for modern life and for things that are happening on right now. That's not my problem. Oh, it's sad what's happening to you. It's not right what's happening to you, but actually it's your problem. And it's a mirror of modern society, even though it's built in an epic fantasy tale. So I think this will get explored in future books as well, as we get more involved with more of the factions and more of the politics that are involved in there. The politics element, I think, in book 1 is confined to local politics, if you want to say. So what happens in this one group of people that we concentrate on. And the fantasy element of it seems to be limited to humanoid characters, certainly so far anyway. They all seem to be humanoid characteristics, unless I missed something. Even the people that we meet along the way are humanoid. There are some dragons, you can see from the cover. There's like a dragon involved in this in some way. But the settlements, the villages, the hamlets that are there are all linked in some way to the local government or the ruling faction, even if they're not held directly in its locale. They kind of feed off whatever's going to happen more widely politically in the regions. And again, this is explored some in the book, but I think it'll also play a larger role in what's going to happen in the future. So some people that are in these hamlets and villages and populations are going to play direct roles in the story this time. They might filter on as we make our way through the books. So let's talk about some of the characters. And there are a lot of characters in here. There's a lot of central characters. There's a lot of side characters. But I'm going to concentrate on 4 of them. The primary one is going to be a young lady called Tilly. Now, Tilly isn't just one of the main characters in here. She also happens to be the subject of some of the short story novella kind of things that Jim has put out after this to kind of tie it over, which is interesting, I think, because Tilly is what is known as the last of the keepers, or certainly she believes she's the last of the keepers. Her mother, father, brothers, sisters, family, etc. have been murdered, and she's the last one left standing. So the question arises, well, what is a keeper? Now, most people will guess what a keeper is because it's language that's used in other stories around this time. But certainly a keeper is somebody who has a repository of knowledge, and knowledge that is in danger of being lost. As part of this, she is being hunted by the enemy, the Dominion, because obviously there must be knowledge which will hurt them in somewhere or they're afraid of. So she's being hunted across the world, and she's trying to get away. Now, sent to save her is, well, this young man called Navid, who is a seer. And a seer is supposedly cursed. He's trying to create a new destiny for himself. He wants to get away from the spectre of the curse and kind of make his own path. And he's been told that part of that path to redemption is helping this young girl be safe. And he's been sent by the prophet of his region to do this. And he is invested very much in doing this and breaking free of the seer. A seer being a kind of akin to an apprentice prophet or otherwise. And he's a really interesting character because his own motivations do not totally lie with Tilly's motivations, but in some ways, as long as she's safe, he's got a chance of fulfilling his destiny, and so they make it an unlikely match or pair. Tilly's very, very untrusting because of experience with her family being murdered, etc., and the fact that she feels she's a sole path to watch. And Navid feels he's isolated and can't really express himself. And this idea of forging your own path is one that is very prevalent. I'll come back to in a while. The third character we're going to come to is the heir to the crown of Jeremiah the King, who is shown and talked about in the prologue. And he is a young man who is not really sure what he wants to be. He's still making his way, but he sees himself very much of the people. He sees himself as wanting to contribute to society in terms of doing the things that the ordinary people do. He does not see himself as a ruler at this stage, and he's very unsure and he wants to forge his own path. So Gabriel kind of decides to take matters into his own hands. And the fourth character I'm going to talk about is never actually a character in the book, but it kind of helps with some of the world building. There's a guy called the Wizard Titan who is seen as the last great wizard that there ever was. And he has disappeared and gone, and he's left some remnants of things in the world. So a lot of the magic system that comes about is hard to talk about without talking about spoilers, but I'll give you a general idea. So he was an incredibly powerful wizard. There doesn't seem to be anybody like him as his equal. In fact, magic doesn't really seem to play as prevalent a role in society outside of this idea of foresight or otherwise. But he left kind of some very powerful spells called abbreviations about, and one of them is introduced at the very start of the book to help them portal travel around the world and to get them safe, etc. But there's this idea that the Wizard Titan removed himself from the world to keep things equal and, keep things safe, etc., all that kind of stuff, but that he's somewhere in the background. I think it's one of the key pieces of intrigue that's really going to play a part in this story as well as the future. So that's their main characters. There are some other ones, certainly very prominent ones. I've talked about the king. I've talked about, the factions that are involved in the government, that will play a part, and the other side characters that are involved, that they meet along the way and will play a role here, there, and everywhere. But the main enemy is this idea of the Dominion. We do have the chance to find out about their motivations and what they're hoping to achieve by doing all this. It's dealt out very piecemeally. It's dealt out very slowly, and actually ties in at the end to make a bit more sense than it does as you go through the story, because you're not really sure where they're coming from. But the magic system, as I say, is this kind of aloof bit. The fantasy element is not really bang in your face. What is interesting about it, though, is how the magic seems to be formed. It seems to be very much element-based or science-based. So the magic seems to come from working out how the elements work and how they interact, rather than it just kind of fire coming out of somebody's hands, which I think is really interesting way to approach this. Like I say, there's not a huge amount of magic in it, certainly so far. Once it's revealed to you, I think the gears start working in your head as to how you would go about writing this or using this as a narrative device going forward. So this idea of foresight, there's element-based magic. You have a powerful wizard that's lurking in the background that has disappeared, is gone, is presumed dead, or has left remnants behind him, and there are certainly ancient creatures that are in the world as well, like our good old dragon that makes an appearance. So there's all that going on, and that's basically the premise and the setup and the interest of the characters in the world. So if I'm going to talk about the strengths of the things that I really like about the book, I mean, the foremost part of it is this key part of these young people forging their own paths, and they're really trying to decide for themselves whether they are going to take control of their own life and knock out their own path, or whether they're going to follow in the family traditions. So you've got the young heir. Is he going to do what his father wants him to do, that he expects him to do, that he's been raised to do, even though he has his own ideas? Telly is this young woman who has a secret to hold. She has to find safety and sanctuary. Is she going to do and keep herself safe and use the knowledge in a safe way? Navid, is he going to fill out his destiny? He wants to get rid of this curse. What is the curse? How can he affect it? How can he get rid of it? These are all questions that they have in the start, and the book charts their journey of discovery, both for good and for bad. And it's really interesting to see how they change, but don't change. The characters stay true to who they seem to be. You know, one of the things that I think happens sometimes is that characters do complete 180s in the middle, and you go, well, that person wouldn't have done that. I think one of the real strengths of this is that the characters kind of have a set of values. They have a set of things. They certainly make changes, but they always seem believable. They always seem like there's something that could have and should have happened naturally, organically from who they were. There's also found family in this, both in good terms and bad terms. People that band together, there's people that are seen as annoyances. The annoying characters end up being some of the most interesting and rich characters. How their story plays out is fascinating. Again, both good and bad. And the fact that these people aren't alone, and that actually there's a much wider ranging world at play here. And this commitment to developing these side characters is, again, a big strength. Some of these characters are very clear, there doesn't seem to have a role to play yet in the story, but they're treated with as much care and as much development. We get to find out about their motivations. We get to find out what makes them tick, what they want to avoid, what they want to grow, how they see themselves in the world, and why this is all important to them. And I think, well, I've heard some people say that bit was irritating to them. I loved it. I love the fact, because you knew that the author was trying to build more here than just tell one story. Maybe that's why it's 700 pages long. Some people complain about the length of it, saying they could have trimmed some of it out. It never feels slow. I think it's really well paced. It doesn't feel like anything drags for too long. And this multi-POV, with only having a couple of POVs, is used really well to keep the thing fresh. Every new location that they go to is well thought out. And again, there's one of the biggest strengths that I think there is. The writing in this, I think, is exceptional, especially in terms of the world. Every time we go to a new location or we go to a new biome, it's very clear what that biome looks like, what it's feeling about it. And it's actually one of the chapters, chapter 12, it just sticks in my head when I read it. It's where they get to a city that seems abandoned and they walk through it. And even though I haven't read it in a very long time, it just made me think of Wheel of Time. And I'd really be interested to know if the writer, intentionally or otherwise, was trying to mimic some of that feeling of Shadar Logoth when he was writing this. This idea as they walk through it, and you notice little characteristics and little things all the time that give you, the reader, a little bit more information. Just little details of things as they look up and around them. When you're wowed and you walk into a place that you've never been to before, and you think, wow, 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 oh, look at that detail there, and they describe it really beautifully. They do the same thing over there, do the same thing. It was very reminiscent of it, and like I say, I may be totally misremembering that part of Eye of the World, but I remember having the same emotion of that when I read that 20 years ago or whatever it was as well, and it feels so reminiscent of it. And this continues throughout the book. You know, when you go and meet new characters, even the battle sequences I think are so well written. You really get a good sense of time and place, and actually how the characters' geography is linked together. So if multiple characters are around the battlefield, exactly where they are in relation to each other, and I think that bit's really great. It helps build the tension and build the stakes to it, because you know how close or how far away help is at any given time. Is there stuff that I would like to be developed in it? More than the same weaknesses? Well, I want to know how the next book's progressing, because I'm ready to read the next one. I don't mind telling you. The only other thing I can really think didn't make an awful lot of sense to me, and this could be the fault of me, is the premise of the book. So the 7th cadence. The 7th cadence is a combat system, or the cadences are a combat system. They're about the rhythm and flow of how you swordplay or how you fight. It's alluded to that the 7th cadence is like a defensive posture, that kind of stuff, but how that bit worked wasn't entirely clear to me as the reader. It kind of fudged and get me by. I think it was clever to write the overriding principle about that and give you something to attach to, so that when they're moving through the cadences, so they'll fight 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 6. They'll make their way through the progressions of a fight. But aside from that, I have not a lot bad to say about it. Most of it's in retrospect, I kind of look at and go, well, that bit was the one bit of the book that I kind of think, yeah, I didn't really get a sense of exactly what that was. When you look at inspiration for the book, I mean, most of this is in retrospect. It was only when I was thinking back later, God, the multi-faction society, everybody has their own agenda, is very reminiscent of Wheel of Time, even if, you know, that's not really explored in this book to that extent. It's promised for more, but I definitely get a much more of a feel of Shannara out of this from what's going on. The idea of the Wizard Titan as being an overarching magical influence feels so reminiscent of later books with Al-Anon, etc. in it. Feels very much that the traverse across the different locations and locales and the peril and dangers that are in there is again very reminiscent. And that's what I thought of the book 7th Cadence. I gave it 5 stars in my Goodreads review. I really, really enjoyed it. A long book that flew by, that I really enjoyed thoroughly. I've said before in my wrap up, I think it's a very easy read paperback. I think it's very well constructed and made, and congrats on putting together a very readable text in terms of paperback, because, you know, falls open quite nicely, and I really enjoyed it. Next up, well, let's talk spoilers. If you don't want to go any further, don't. And if you want to just jump straight here, I put a chapter marker in this for you. Spoilers, interesting theories on where this goes, etc. I didn't really see that the protagonist, or the main protagonist of the enemy, the Dominion, would be linked to the prologue at the start. You know, that this kind of hierarchy or lineage would be passed down. It definitely gives the next book impetus into that. This is personal. This isn't just a case of being, you know, something that we have a faction who just wants to take over everybody. There's more to this. I thought the bit where Gabriel leaves him at the end and kind of by accident saves himself was a bit weak, but I will say that when he left him, I was annoyed. You know, I was like, why are you leaving this guy? I've seen all these movies before, and for God's sake, you know what's going to happen here. This guy is not dead. Okay, to explain that actually would have been to his detriment was good, but at the time it didn't make any sense why he left him. Could have created another impetus for him to get back, or that he was distracted or something would have worked a bit better for me, but these are such minor bits. I really loved the exploration and how the magic works for the creating of the weapons from the forest people. The people that are there, that they kind of have this thing when you have ground beneath you, and that very much this idea that nature, magic that's connected to nature, is seen as good magic. I think that bit is great, and actually the Dominion aspect of the magic, which is to take over beasts and use beasts against their will, so to speak, is seen as evil. I think all of that is very well thought out and well constructed. I really like that element of it, that the good and bad could be easily differentiated as being, you know, there was no real grey line about what's a good way to do it, what's a bad way to do it. I really liked how Telly took down the dragon as well by figuring it out, working out its weakness, that there was still peril in it, and that you really get a good sense of that Telly has a really great way of staying calm in fights, collected in fights. The magic that she uses then, while all around her losing their heads, she can put it together. Naveed's growth as a character in the same, that maybe everything that you're told isn't true. Maybe I know who I am as a person was really strong. Gabriel's relationship with his men is such a strength of this book. This creating this found family, showing that he's an inspiring character to the people will follow and people lead, showing the absolute his uncle, that man thinks he's clever, that he's going to do inspiration and all that kind of stuff is much more important in the long run. And Gabriel is a firm favourite of mine. In fact, how could you not love the character of Gabriel? He starts off as a boy who you're really not sure you need to grow a set, as they would say, but by the end you realise that he's realised who he is and what his role in society is, and who he aspires to be. I think it's just utterly wonderful. And then we'll have the two sisters who are caught in the wilderness but seem to have found their way free to do whatever it is they want or have to do. Some of the other stuff that I loved in Caldor, that when they got to the house and they found the secret rooms, etc., and the observatory, loved it. It just added that other element of this fantasy world. There's more going on here than meets the eye. You know, what looked just like a world with castles and towns and ecosystems and all the rest of it. People have designed, and there's much more mysticism of what's going on. And the fact that when the prophets have all died, it's nearly like a blank slate for us and the people that discover as we're going along, I think it's really interesting. So there's some of my thoughts. Again, if you've read it and want to have a discussion about this, let me know. I wouldn't mind doing a little bit of a chat about this book, especially maybe as it comes up to the release of book 2 and maybe people start going on the read to read book 2. I'm really invested in this series of books. Lots to discuss. If you've liked this video or if you've enjoyed this video, please let me know. And I'll catch you soon. Take care. All the best.